Yeah, talking about DID, right? I see DID like what linear regression is to data science, just like an hello world programming. Everybody who comes into the causality world, they are like, hey, I want to know DID. It's a little bit simple, but there are assumptions behind it, right? When you compare it with, let's say, a technique like synthetic control methods, my opinion is that, at least DID is much more grounded in reality in terms of assumptions. But when you get to the SCM, right, synthetic control methods, the assumptions are a little bit more foggy, more vague. What's your take on that in terms of, the reasonableness of the assumptions? How important is the reasonableness of your assumptions in causal inference?
So I think again, all models suits different setup. The idea is very useful not only because technically speaking, if you do the canonical did, it's very simple. It's very simple, just linear regression with main terms and an interaction term. So it's very simple. But also the canonical did is very simple to explain to non-technical people, which is very convenient. You see the pre-period before the shock, you see that they are parallel. Basically, they behave the same. Okay, so this is a good counterfactual. You have a shock and you have just one die differ. And usually it's very intuitive. That being said, of course, the idea is great, but it's very, you have huge functional form assumption, very strong functional form assumption, basically. And the thing is, there have been a lot of research, right? And recently, many papers discussing these assumptions. I actually on the last 15 years, but recently, very good papers summarizing the state of the research. There is one chapter in the book by Mateusz Fakure, which is it's called the Did Saga, the chapter.
Mhm.
And it's a fascinating chapter to highlight this evolution and the limitation of the did, the definitive setting. So first, and then we go to SCM. But but then basically now what you can do and what I liked, I was teaching this 2, 3 weeks ago. It's basically what you do now is you can relax some of these assumptions, functional form assumptions from the canonical definitive, and have something that's way more robust and flexible. So basically leading to two-way fixed effect definitive, which has some limitations, but then you can evolve of two-way fixed effect event study, which is a did type event study. So when you have way more flexible functional form that can account for dynamic treatment effects, which are it's central in marketing, because the fact that, for example, if you want to measure the impact of an ad, it's of course you won't run just a simple linear regression with an indicator variable ads, no ads, because the ads might have delayed accumulating some effects,
The ad
lagged
stock
effects. So,
effect.
so
Yeah.
basically, ad stock effect, exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a non-linear complex effect. So you want to relax all these functional form strong assumption, and typically the event study will allow to do this. So that's basically the state of affair is that now you have very way more flexible models that are really like in that are evolved definitive models. Back to SCM. SCM is not trivial to explain. So it's cool because again it's visual. You really see so again to be sure that everybody is aware what we mean by this. A synthetic control method is basically it starts like this. Causal inference, the goal to measure causal effect is to compare a treated group to a counterfactual. Basically, a good counterfactual will be the ideal counterfactual will be the parallel world, the treated without the treatment during the treatment period. So you cannot have this. So you try to find a good counterfactual, something that will simulate this or be as close as possible to this. So in diff, of course, it's not easy to find a control group which are within this 10 region, the good combination of these that will act as a good control. Maybe none of these alone are good counterfactual. Maybe if you average them and you put them together, it's not a great counterfactual as well. So then it leads to a huge headache, which has been solved kind of with synthetic control method, right? So the synthetic control method will do the following. It's in the data-driven way, you will basically define the counterfactual, and this counterfactual will be constructed with a pool of donor. So basically you give potential control, and it will create a weighted average of these some of these elements in this pool of donor in order to minimize the distance in the pre-period, so basically to match the treated group in the pre-period. So I know you know this, it's just to explain to the audience also. So basically, that's the idea of SCM. Now, it's really cool because visually you see that you can control often a good counterfactual, but it has advantages. Again, it's data driven, so it might reduce, if you're doing it well, the risk of p hacking. Basically, you just select the counterfactual in order to have your effect. Because here it's in data driven way, it's really transparent. So at the end, you know that, let's say, your synthetic control is built by 15% of region A, 25 of region C, etc., etc. So you really know which region are exploited. But at the same time, it's some fun. It's if you have several regions, it's also not trivial to understand and test and ensure that the identifying assumptions are correct because you might have several regions. And it's harder sometimes to precisely understand and check the validity of these assumptions. For example, to be sure that you don't have other shocks in these regions specifically. That's one thing. And the inference is also a bit special with synthetic control method. It's kind of this old way of computing p-values, but it's less intuitive, I would say, than usual setups which are very simple, and the math are also a bit complex and involved. So compared to a diff in diff, where it's essentially just a linear regression, multiple linear regression with dummies, it's way more complex to sell, to understand, and to do inference with it. So that's the part that I'm a bit less excited about with SCM.